Chapter 4. Left Behind. Akimbo thought quickly. If his father ran for safety now, that could prompt the lion to attack. If he himself ran towards his father, that could have the same effect. The rifle, that was the only thing that stood between them and disaster. He bent down and picked it up. Akimbo had watched his father practicing with his rifle, but had never used it himself. He knew about the safety catch, though, and he slipped it off and drew back the weapon's bolt. The sound was loud in the night, and he wondered whether the lion had heard it. Akimbo drew the rifle up to his shoulder and looked down the barrel. For a moment or two, he lost sight of the lion, but then he saw it again. It was moving again, down on its haunches, as if circling its prey. He steadied the weapon and tried to line up the sights, but it was difficult in the darkness. Then he had the lion in his sights, and his finger moved to the trigger. But he stopped. If he fired, could he be sure that he would not just wound the lion, which would then become enraged and take his father within a few bounds? "Fire!" he heard his father shout. "Fire in the air!" Akimbo moved the barrel up sharply and squeezed the trigger. There was a shattering explosion that made his ears ring with sharp fury. He drew back the bolt and pulled the trigger again, reeling from the kick of the rifle's recoil. Then he lowered the rifle and looked towards the lion. It had disappeared. Akimbo's father came running towards him. "Well done!" he cried, gently taking the rifle from his son's hands. "That sent her off in a hurry." "Her?" said Akimbo, still a little dazed. "Was it a lioness?" "Yes," said his father, "it was. Your first shot sent her scurrying off into the bush, and I should imagine that the second just drove the message home further." Akimbo sat down. He was still feeling shaky, and the ringing in his ears seemed louder than ever. "We'll go over in a moment and see why the trap didn't spring," said Akimbo's father. "And I won't leave my rifle here this time." "Will we have to try and catch her again tomorrow night?" asked Akimbo. "I doubt it," said his father. "I should think that she's learned her lesson for the time being. Lions don't like to stay around places when they've heard gunfire." They walked over to the trap. The goat was still bleating from shock, they thought, but when they arrived at the trap, they saw that it was for a very different reason. The trap had now sprung, and the gate was down, and there was a lion inside. But it was a very small lion indeed. "A cub!" exclaimed Akimbo. "Look, we've caught her cub!" The next morning, when the men brought the truck back, Akimbo's father explained to them all what had happened during the night. "When the lioness came out of the trap," he said, "she must have tripped the mechanism. But her cub was still inside and couldn't get out. That's why she didn't charge me. Then, when Akimbo fired the rifle, she panicked and ran away." "What are we going to do with the little one?" asked one of the men. "Can we let him go?" Akimbo's father scratched his head. "I just don't know," he said. "I suspect that the mother won't be coming back now, so we can't really leave him. He'll die of starvation." Akimbo looked out into the night. "Won't she wait for him?" he said. "Don't you think she'll return for him once we've gone away?" "No," said Akimbo's father. "I've seen this sort of thing before. I imagine that she's been shot at by somebody some time ago, probably even wounded. That's why she's taken to going for easy prey like cattle. She'll be really frightened now." Akimbo tugged at his father's elbow. "We could take him back with us," he urged. "We could feed him at the house." The ranger sighed. "Who's going to do that?" he asked. "I'm far too busy these days to be spending my time feeding lion cubs." "I'll do it," offered Akimbo. "I've got the time." "And when he grows up?" asked Akimbo's father. "What happens then?" "That's a long time off," said Akimbo. "But he could go and live in the reserve." Akimbo's father thought for a few moments. He glanced down at the lion cub, nestling softly in his son's arms. The little creature looked so gentle and trusting that it was impossible to resist him. "All right," he said. "I suppose so." Akimbo's mother was astonished when they arrived home later that day, with Akimbo clutching a wriggling bundle of mewing fur. "A lion!" she exclaimed. Surely that's not the lion who's been causing all the trouble. Akimbo's father laughed. No, he said, but I'm afraid it was his mother. We caught him by mistake, explained Akimbo. His mother left him behind in the trap. I see, said Akimbo's mother, bending down to inspect the little animal as Akimbo placed him gently on the floor. Then she looked up, puzzled. Why would any lioness leave a little cub like this? She asked. What happened? Akimbo explained, and while he did so, the cub nuzzled warmly at his ankles. Then the little lion stood unsteadily on its feet. It looked up at Akimbo's mother, blinked, and then sat down. He's weak, she said. Look, his legs are unsteady. He'll have to be fed soon, Akimbo's father said. You should get some milk and warm it up for him. Akimbo poured a little bit of milk into a saucepan and then put it onto the stove to heat up. It took a few minutes, but soon the milk was warm to the touch. Then he poured it into a large saucer and placed it before the cub. The tiny lion looked down at the plate, sniffed uncertainly, and then turned his head away. We're going to have trouble feeding him, said Akimbo's father gravely. These creatures are hard to raise in captivity. I'm afraid he might not make it. Akimbo shook his head. He'll eat, he said. I'm sure he will. He pushed the saucer towards the cub again, and then pushed his nose down into the milk. The cub snuffled and drew his head away sharply, giving Akimbo a reproachful look as he did so. It's strange to him, said Akimbo's father. He's used to lioness milk, I'm afraid. Akimbo's mother, who had gone out of the room, now returned. Let's try this, she said, showing her son a baby's bottle. You certainly liked it when you were a baby. They poured the milk into the bottle and then pushed the teat into the little lion's mouth. He spat out the teat straight away and tried to walk away from them on his unsteady legs. Akimbo was disappointed. He could see that the cub was weak, and it saddened him to think of how hungry it must be. If only it would realize that the milk was good for it. We'll try again later, said Akimbo's mother. In the meantime, let's put him in the old chicken run. He should be safe there. They carried the cub out of the kitchen and placed him gently in the wire run, which Akimbo's mother used to use for her hens. It was a good place for the little animal, as it was shady, and he would be able to move about without being able to escape. He stood up, looking about his new surroundings, and then lay down again. We'll try to feed him again in half an hour, said Akimbo's mother. He should be used to his new home by then. By the way, what are you going to call him? Simba, said Akimbo simply, because that means lion. Simba, repeated Akimbo's mother, nodding her approval. That sounds like a very good name for him.